So we now have 4 divs with an image and a text image beneath it in each div. And if we look at the code, you'll see that we've nicely separated them, and Dreamweaver's created the code in a pretty clean way. So I've got my family div with the images, I've got my waiting div with those images, leaves, and berry. And I'm ready to start applying some styles to this page so you can see how CSS can be used for alignment as well as basic formatting. To give you a bigger view as I do this, I'm going to go back to just design view at this stage, scroll up a little higher on the page so that you can better see what happens as I align these divs. Actually, let's get it right there. So this div, if you forget what a div is called, you can always select the div and then look at the handy little tag selector at the bottom. Oh yeah, this is my berry div. And when I go to create a new style to position my berry div, watch what happens. Click on the new style button and Dreamweaver knows that I'm in the berry div, so it automatically inserts #berry. It's also included #container because you can create advanced styles that are very specific. I could create a style that will only affect a div called berry if it's inside a div called container. At this stage, I know I'm only going to have one div on the page called berry, so I don't need to be that specific, and I want to simplify things a little bit. So just trust me that you don't need the container in this selector. We're just going to create an ID style named for each of these divs. Now, as I create this style, I want to do several things at once. The first thing I want to do is under the block settings, I want to set text align to center. Now, I told you you can't center a div on a page, but you can center the contents within a div by using text align center. I also want to go back to my box settings. We'll use this category a lot when we're moving things around a page. This time, I'm going to add some margin space. I'm going to put 5 pixels of margin all the way around this container, and I'm going to put 5 pixels of padding as well. Padding goes on the inside of the container, margin goes on the outside. And as we do this a couple times, I think you'll start to see the effect. The other trick I'm going to use here is the float. If I choose float left, you'll see immediately when I click OK that pushes my div over to the left and brings the things that are below it up around beside it. So let's do something similar for the next div. That's our leaves div. And again, if we just click the new button, we can remove the word container, click OK, and I'm going to create the same kind of style. Set blocks so that our content will ultimately be centered within this. Under box, I'm going to set padding to 5, margin to 5, float to left, and when I click OK, you see these divs are now side by side. And as you might imagine, if we do the same thing for the next div, this time, let's set block to center. And in the box settings, I'm going to set padding to 5, but I'm not going to set margins for a moment. I think this will help you understand the difference between margins and paddings. So let me go ahead and float this left. Click OK. So you can see if I select the waiting div that I have 5 pixels of padding inside the div, and at the moment I have no margin on the outside because I didn't set that. In contrast, if I select the leaves div, you see I have 5 pixels of padding inside and I have 5 pixels of margin outside. So that's the difference between margin and padding. Margin is on the outside of the element, padding is on the inside of the element, and they can be used separately and in combination for various effects. So let's go back and add the outside, the margin. You can do that by choosing Add Property, or you can do that by just double-clicking on the style you just created, going back to Box, and adding your 5 pixels to all 4 options. And you see it's instantly applied. Let's do the very last one. And here's another trick. I've now created 3 out of 4 of these, but anytime you're creating a series of styles that are all almost the same, you can always right-click and choose Duplicate. I'm duplicating the waiting ID style, and I'm going to call it family. Now you have to be careful here because you have to make sure that whatever you named that div, you type in here exactly the same way. If you have any variation in extra space or case difference, this may not work. So click OK. And what you see now is that I've created a family div that's identical to the weighting div, and it's been instantly applied. Now you may wonder why the page doesn't look quite as good here as it does in the final design. And I'll show you how to fix that in just a moment. But what's happening is I've now floated all 4 of these divs, but my container div isn't floated, so they're out of line with each other. There's a wonderful little trick I can use to fix this by adding a footer to the bottom with a clear setting, and that'll bring the container div down below all 4 of my image divs.